As US position on Ukraine, NATO shifts, a recall and why it matters. April 3, 2008, NATO's Bucharest Summit declaration said NATO welcomes Ukraine and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. We agreed today that these countries will become members of NATO. 2025 United States Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth told the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in Brussels that United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. During his February 12 phone call with Russia's President Vladimir Putin, US President Donald Trump rejected an impractical the possibility of Ukraine joining the NATO, the 32-member transatlantic military alliance in which an attack on any member is considered an attack on all. President Donald Trump rejected as impracticable during Russian President Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump rejected as impracticable the possibility of Ukraine joining the NATO. The 32-member transatlantic military alliance in, in which an attack on any member is considered an attack on all. The possibility of Ukraine becoming part of NATO has been Moscow's declared casus belli, though the US and its European allies have never been committed to when Ukraine might join the alliance. The statements by the Trump and Hegseth mark a foundational shift in America's Ukraine policy. In 1990, James Baker, President George W. H. Bush's Secretary of State, assured Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader who oversaw the dissolution of USSR, that not an inch of NATO's present military jurisdiction will be spread in eastern direction. But in fact, NATO continued to expand steadily eastward, adding former Soviet allies and satellites as members. In 2000, Robert Gates, who served as CIA director from 91 to 93 and later as Secretary of Defense under President George W. Bush and Barack Obama, said in an interview that Gorbachev and others were led to believe that West would not pursue the expansion of NATO eastward. In 1999, less than a decade after the collapse of the USSR, NATO onboarded former Warsaw Pact countries, Czechia, formerly part of Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Poland. President Bill Clinton presented this as a project for democracy. We want all of Europe to have what America helped building in Western Europe, a community where nations cooperate to make war unthinkable. This is why I have pushed hard for NATO's enlargement and why we must keep NATO's doors open to new democratic nations. In 2004, more Warsaw Pact countries, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and Romania joined NATO as did erstwhile Soviet republics Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Slovenia, which were former part of neutral Yugoslavia. NATO was now at literally Russia's doorstep. Albania and Croatia joined in 2009, and Montenegro and North Macedonia in 2017 and 2020 respectively, expanding NATO's Eastern European footprint further. The expansion of NATO presents Russia with a classic security dilemma, a situation in which the actions of one state to make itself more secure tends to make another state less secure and prompts them to respond in ways that result in a spiral of hostility. Article 5 in the NATO Charter of 1949 establishes the principle of collective defense, said that an unarmed attack against any NATO member is to be considered as an attack against them all, and all NATO members will be obligated to defend the one which has been attacked. President Putin's Russia sees NATO as a tool of Western hegemony, and its expansion eastward appears as the US creeping on the Cold War enemy, which Moscow perceives as a threat to national security. The US has a Monroe Doctrine which says that the Western Hemisphere is our backyard. The same logic applies to Russians, political scientists, and international relations. Mearsheimer said. at the idea exchange. While Russia has protested NATO's eastward expansion since at least 97, when President Boris Yeltsin tried and failed to obtain a guarantee from Clinton that NATO would not add any former Soviet republics. The possibility of Ukraine joining the alliance has been the ultimate red line for Russia, securing the more than 2,000-kilometer land and sea border with Ukraine is critical to its national security, and Moscow has been clear that joining NATO will be a declaration of war. President George W. Bush was the first major leader to suggest that Ukraine should be brought into NATO, but France and Germany were opposed, and the Bucharest summit produced the worst of all worlds compromise, a promise without a timeline for delivery. While nothing changed for Ukraine, Russian insecurity spiked sharply. Putin annexed strategically vital Crimea in 2014 and ultimately invaded the Donbas in 2022. Meanwhile, NATO continued to repeat its resolve to let Ukraine in. In July 24th, at the NATO summit in Washington, its leaders pledged to support Ukraine on an irreversible path to full Euro Atlantic integration, including the NATO membership. All this has changed now. Trump is all but certain to either steer NATO in different directions or cause some fundamental fissures in an alliance in this attempt to do so. President Trump will not allow anyone to turn Uncle Sam into an Uncle Sucker, Hegseth told America's NATO allies, a reference to President Dwight D. Eisenhower's 1959 lament about European dependence on the US security umbrella. While Hegseth has somewhat softened his stance since, Vice President J.D. Vance used his speech at the Munich Security Conference on Friday to attack Europe and say nothing on Ukraine, even though he did meet President Vladimir Zelensky afterward. American and Russian representatives will meet in Riyadh on Tuesday, where some indications on the direction of the war, now almost 3 years old, could emerge. Zelensky has, however, said he would not recognize the outcome of any negotiations of which Ukraine is not a part. The dawn quake in Delhi, the capital lies in the Aravalli Delhi fold, where deformed layers of rock sometimes release stress in the form of earthquakes. Aravalli Delhi fold belt. Aravalli Delhi fold belt. Aravalli Delhi fold belt. This mechan- This mechanism is different from the one that triggers earthquakes in the Himalayan region. Delhi is no stranger to earthquakes, but the one that occurred before dawn on Monday was slightly different. Mostly the tremors experienced in Delhi from time to time are from earthquakes that originate elsewhere, sometimes as far away as Afghanistan. Monday's magnitude 4 earthquake was located in Delhi itself, somewhere close to the Dhaula Kuan area. In fact, it was the strongest earthquake to have originated in Delhi in at least 5 years, data from the National Center of Seismology said. Another earthquake of similar magnitude occurred a couple of hours later near Siwan in Bihar. Magnitude 4 earthquakes are not very strong and do not result in much damage. There were no reports of any damage due to Monday's earthquakes. Delhi lies in seismically active area and thus an earthquake originating here is not a surprise. In the last 5 years, areas in and around Delhi have produced several small earthquakes with magnitudes ranging between 2 and 3 or lower. These are barely noticed except by seismometers. India's official earthquake hazard map puts Delhi in zone 4, the second highest classification of areas based on their susceptibility to shaking experienced during an earthquake. Zone 4 in India includes areas that are expected to experience MSK 8 level intensity during an earthquake. MSK or Medvedev Sponheuer and Karnik scale. Medvedev Sponheuer and Karnik scale is a measurement of intensity rather than strength or energy released, which is described by magnitude. Simply put, the MSK scale measures the susceptibility of an area to an earthquake. Based on local geology and other factors, the two places can feel and be impacted by the quake very differently, even if they are equidistant from its epicenter. Delhi falls in a region that has high susceptibility to quakes. MSK 8 means the area is vulnerable to major damage being caused to buildings and other infrastructure. Zone 5, the most vulnerable areas in India, corresponds to MSK 9 of intensity or higher. Delhi lies in what is known as Aravali-Delhi Fold Belt. Aravali-Delhi Fold Belt, a seismically active geological belt extending from southern or eastern Rajasthan to Haryana and Delhi. This region is characterized by presence of deformed layers of rocks that have folded or bent due to geological processes hundreds of millions of years. These deformities have created stress which is sometimes released in the form of earthquakes. This is very different mechanism from the one that triggers earthquakes in the Himalayan region, which is one of the most quake-prone regions in the world. The Himalayan region has been witnessing the subduction of the Indian tectonic plate under the Eurasian plate when pushing against the other, which results in a lot of stress building up. The Aravali-Delhi fold belt was much more seismically active in the past than it is now. Over the years, the tectonic activity in the region has slowed down considerably, leading to greater geological stability. But some faults still remain, which give rise to occasional mild earthquakes. It is like the old scars flaring up once in a while. In the past, the area has witnessed significant geological processes, but these have largely stopped now, said Vineet Gehlot. Aravali Delhi fold belt was much more seismically active in the past than it is now. Over the years, the tectonic activity in the region has slowed down considerably, leading to a greater geological stability. But some faults will remain, which give rise to occasional mild earthquakes. On an average, about 25 earthquakes of magnitude 2.5 or higher, approximately 5 of which around magnitude 3.5 are produced in and around Delhi every year, according to the 22 research paper that Gehlot had co-authored with Rajiv Yadav of the National Geophysical Research Institute in Hyderabad. Many people reported having heard a peculiar sound during the earthquake in Delhi, a sound that was not known to have accompanied the earlier quakes that were felt in the capital. It was the sound that led some to speculate that the nature of Monday's quake was different in some way. The fact is, earthquakes do sometimes produce sound, but it is not heard most of the time. Earthquakes are energy waves traveling through the earth, causing vibrations as they pass. Earthquakes are energy waves traveling through the earth, causing vibrations as they pass. These vibrations and shaking do sometimes produce low frequency sound that are beyond the hearing capacity of human beings. Bigger earthquakes can produce sounds in the audible range, but these are relatively rare events. Earthquake sounds are a real thing, they exist, but it is very unlikely that you would ever hear them. Most of the time, people mistake other kinds of sound, such as the sound of earthquake. Big earthquakes, for example, can result in buildings and other things vibrating. This shaking can produce different kinds of sound, and these are often confused with the sound of the earthquake. I'm not sure what people heard in Delhi, but not much should be read into this. Gehlot said Delhi had a good history of quakes, but not large earthquakes of this kind that are witnessed in the Himalayan region. There is a mention in some historical record of a strong earthquake having occurred in Delhi around 1720. Another big earthquake is reported to have happened in 1803, in which the Qutub Minar is said to have suffered a major damage. This one is supposed to have occurred around Mathura. Some of these past events are being reassessed now with the newer data and technology. For example, it is now understood that the 1803 earthquake most likely happened in the Srinagar Devprayag region of Uttarakhand and was felt in Delhi. The features of the earthquake are almost typical of a Himalayan quake. The chances of larger earthquake originating in Delhi are quite slim. There is always this discussion whether Delhi can be a hit by a big earthquake. Indeed, a large earthquake could result in a very heavy destruction in a densely populated and heavily built up region like Delhi. But based on what we know of the area, I would say such an event is an extremely unlikely. The tectonic setup, structures underneath the surface, energy stored, stress, all are not conducive to produce a very big earthquake in and around Delhi. Bourbon, the barrel-based aged American whiskey with a mash bill comprising at least 51% corn, could become cheaper. Department of Revenue last week slashed the total tariff on bourbon from 150% to 100%, meaning thus popular American whiskies such as Woodford Reserve, Maker's Mark, and Evan Williams are likely to become cheaper. According to US law, for a whiskey to be labeled bourbon, it must be made in US, have a mash bill combination of grains used comprising at least 51% corn, be aged for at least 2 years in brand new barrels made of white oak and charred on the inside, be bottled at 80 to 125 proof, 40 to 62% alcohol by volume, and contain no additional color or flavoring. While bourbon can be produced anywhere in the US, it is closely associated with rural South, specifically the state of Kentucky. Bacteria made band-aid for plants. What study found? Bacterial cellulose can be used as a bandage to significantly improve healing and regeneration in plants, researchers reported in a study published in journal Science Advances. In the post-Cold War era, the Transatlantic Alliance was founded on a common commitment to international norms that is White House holds in sneering contempt. Let us let's not eat cake. The leaders we choose seem ill-equipped to address today's biggest problems. This refers to the article Imbalance of Power. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Donald Trump unveiled compact catalyzing opportunities for military partnership, accelerated commerce and technology. Catalyzing opportunities for military partnership, accelerated commerce and technology. Given this is underpinned by the convergence of Modi's India First policies and Trump's America First approach, the two countries' gains from each other will depend on the terms of trade and tariffs, which will decide the margins of profit in every transaction. Moreover, the US renowned focus on and emphasis on fossil fuels combined with a missing commitment on climate mitigation and renewable energy is at odds with India's stand on sustainable development goals. This refers to the editorial Intolerable Toll. Second Kum tragedy is a clear-cut sign of an abject failure in crowd management by the concerned authorities who didn't foresee the emerging grave situation and take measures to tackle it. The surging of the crowd didn't occur out of the blue, it was gaining momentum every moment. As people tried to secure seats, there was no adequate arrangements to control the crowd. The selling of general tickets until 11 p.m. speaks volumes of the authorities' negligence. This refers to the editorial ease of tax paying. We should become new income tax bill. We should welcome the new income tax bill as it has done away with many old complicated sections prevailing since 1961. Since it is easy to read and understand, even a common man will be able to comprehend the details. Ironing out the ambiguities will have a salutary effect on the tax regime and may lead to an increase in the quantum of collection. This refers to the editorial ease of tax paying. From taxpayers' perspective, the litmus test of an effective simplification of the Income Tax Act is clear, concise, and complete communication of information. Clear, concise, and a communication of information leading to easy understanding of tax obligations. Citizens should be able to calculate the tax liability for themselves and file returns without any guidance from a lawyer. It should reduce the gap between tax paid and tax assessed and ensure quick resolution of disputes without the involvement of courts or arbitrators. This refers to the article decongesting the court. Supreme Court strength has been increased several times. Going from 8 judges originally to 34 today, India currently has one of the lowest judge to population ratios globally, 21 judges per million population as against 50 million recommended by the Law Commission, which is already far less than US ratio of 150 per million. 21 judges per million population as against 50 per million recommended by Law Commission, which is already far less than the US ratio of 150 per million. But maybe the increase in number of judges isn't the only solution to reduce the caseload. A coherent and consistent jurisprudence, as pointed out by the author, is also required to avoid conflicting orders on the same issue. An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it will eat him last. The recent meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Donald Trump addressed wide ranging issues, including the setting of ambitious targets for bilateral trade. The meeting took place against the backdrop of growing apprehensions over heightened global uncertainty caused in part by the disruptive actions of the US president. India has to carefully navigate this trip, which came at a time when old norms of trade and governance are being rejected and the new ones are yet to take full shape. In order to take forward the idea of Mission 500, India and the US have agreed to go in for a multi-sector bilateral trade agreement by a fall of 2025, keeping in view the broader framework of compact catalyzing opportunities for military partnership, accelerated commerce and technology, the country are poised to move to a mega partnership for prosperity as emphasized by PM Modi, but to achieve the ambitious $500 billion trade target by 2030, substantive efforts will be required. Strong intra-industry trade potential exists in key sectors where both countries can engage in simultaneous imports and exports of similar product groups, thereby offering a greater variety of choices to consumers. Such trade dynamics are particularly promising in chemical products, machinery, and automobiles. The US is also poised to strengthen its position in trade segments such as plastics, space materials, and precision instruments, whereas India is likely to lead in sectors like vegetable products, processed foods, and stone and plaster. These sectors may help to narrow the trade deficit. While the bilateral trade imbalance remains a structural issue, it can effectively moderated through a sustained expansion in trade, fostering deeper economic independence between the two nations. The BTA will aim to adapt an integrated approach for deepening trade across goods and services sector. A BTA is comparatively less complex trade agreement between two partners designed to align broad bilateral trade agreement. Bilateral trade agreement. In con- while addressing the geopolitical consideration and commitments to the WTO. In contrast to an FTA, BTA functions within more limited framework, primarily focusing on tariff reductions, easing non-tariff barriers, and facilitating trade between the contracting parties. The agreement is inherently flexible as it does not adhere to the principle of covering substantive all trade and incorporates simplified rules of origin. BTAs operate at exemptions to the MFN principle, fostering preferential trading arrangements tailored to the strategic interest of the signatories. The negotiation process for a BTA is relatively straightforward, typically centering on select industries while ensuring compliance with WTO regulations. The BTA will also look into the vital aspects of reducing tariffs and non tariff barriers, market access, and supply chain related issues. While India is trying its best to adjust to the new normal in trade and investment frameworks, the same may not be the case with the rest of the world, as most of the other countries have been trading on a most favored nation basis with all those whom they do not have any specific trade deal. Changes brought in by Trump actually have serious implications for existing global arrangements, though through the idea of MFN, WTO members extend any trade advantage granted to one trading partner to all other partners. It was in October 1947 the MFN was incorporated as a guiding principle for global trade in the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs and Trade. So far, the non-discriminatory MFN trade principle has remained a cornerstone of global trade. The WTO's integrated database in January 25 shows that more than 80% of the world merchandise trade is to conduct under MFN terms. This framework was strengthened and absorbed when the transition from GATT to the WTO was made. The Trump administration's actions are moving the global trading arrangement away from MFN. The details, of course, are yet to be worked out, but there are fundamental questions that the world trading system will have to address. As expected earlier this month, Beijing has already approached the WTO against the 10% additional ad valorem duties on all goods originating in China. China says is inconsistent with the US MFN obligations under the Article 1 of the GATT and US trade tariff obligations under Article 11(1)(a). Further, China has identified these measures in excess of US bound rates in the schedule of concessions and commitments annexed to the GATT. As we move forward, we need to appreciate three key issues. For a robust trade partnership, quick response and adaptation to multiple levels from India will be crucial. PM has demonstrated this remarkably well, but the rest of the state establishment needs to innovate and rediscover their instruments and possibilities. PMO will have to lead this through a new system imbued with greater dynamism. Second, India should draw out a strategy to comprehensively leverage the compact to overcome NTBs and enhance market access for Indian products. This would also include learning about additional and new trade instruments that our trade partners bank on. For instance, the US imposes tariff rate quotas that permit a specified quantity of imported merchandise to be entered at a reduced rate of duty during the quota period. Once the tariff rate quota limit is reached, goods can still enter but at a higher rate of duty. Third, India should also simultaneously work on, with other like minded countries of the global south, a larger narrative of the MFN and trade reciprocity. Moving away from the MFN would imply breaking away from the current trade governance framework, which is essential for a more stable, predictable, coherent, and inclusive global trade architecture. So that's all for this. See you in the next one.